To understand the rise of SWAT teams in America, we have to go back to the very beginning, to a time before policing as we know it even existed. American policing wasn't born from a single, grand idea of public safety. Instead, it grew in patches, shaped by local needs, money, and power. And like Europe, where police forces were often centralized, American law enforcement was a local affair, a messy collection of sheriffs, constables, and night watchmen. These were often part-time gigs, poorly regulated, and their main job wasn't really preventing crime. It was maintaining order, the kind of order defined by wealthy landowners and colonial authorities. Nowhere was this clearer than in the South, where one of the earliest forms of organized law enforcement was the slave patrol. These weren't just informal posses, they were legally sanctioned, publicly funded groups tasked with controlling enslaved people, crushing revolts, and capturing escapees. They used surveillance, intimidation, and force, establishing a model of policing built on control, not service, a legacy that would cast a long shadow. Meanwhile, in the industrial cities of the North, a different but related story was unfolding. As factories boomed and cities swelled with immigrants and workers, tensions rose. Factory owners and railroad companies often relied on private security forces to protect their property and put down labor strikes. The line between public police and private interests was blurry. Cops were frequently sent to break up protests and protect company assets, not necessarily the people. When municipal police departments started popping up in the mid-1800s, they were inspired by London's police, but with a distinctly American twist. While the British model aimed for professionalism, American departments were often controlled by local politicians. Getting hired or promoted could depend more on who you knew than what you could do. Training was minimal, sometimes just a quick lesson on using a weapon. The core philosophy was reactive. Police showed up after a crime happened. Planning and prevention were largely an afterthought, as America rolled into the 20th century. These cracks in the system started to show. The Great Migration brought millions of Black Americans from the rural South to northern cities, and waves of immigration from Europe and Latin America changed the urban landscape. This created competition for jobs and housing. Police departments, often dominated by the ruling ethnic groups, were used to enforce social and physical boundaries. Throughout the early 1900s, whenever there was a labor strike, a race riot, or a political protest, the police were there. Their primary mission was clear: restore order, often with batons and mass arrests, with little distinction between peaceful protesters and violent agitators. This approach might have temporarily quieted things down, but it destroyed trust in the long run. Many communities began to see the police not as protectors, but as enforcers for the powerful. By the 1950s, American cities were bigger and more complex than ever. Guns were easier to get, and organized crime was on the rise, but police tactics hadn't kept up. Most departments had no centralized command for emergencies, no standard protocols for a crisis, and no specialized training for extreme situations. A regular beat cop was expected to handle everything from a noise complaint to a hostage situation. With the same basic toolkit, this system relied entirely on improvisation, which worked for routine calls but was a recipe for disaster in a crisis. Then came the 1960s, a decade that would push American policing to its breaking point. The nation was a whirlwind of civil rights marches, anti-war demonstrations, and political organizing. Police were constantly on the front lines, tasked with crowd control. This new role often clashed with growing demands for civil rights and accountability. In August 1965, the city of Los Angeles became a national symbol of this failure. The Watson arrest began with a simple traffic stop and quickly spiraled out of control. For 6 days, chaos reigned. Fires raged, communication between police units collapsed, and officers on the street had no clear leadership. The National Guard had to be called in. The aftermath was devastating: dozens dead, thousands injured, and vast property damage. Investigations revealed a total system failure, fragmented command, poor communication, and a complete lack of a plan. Watts wasn't a one-off event. Similar riots erupted in Detroit, Newark, and other cities. Each time, the lesson was the same: traditional policing was fundamentally broken. It simply could not handle large-scale urban crises. Police leaders were at a crossroads. They could stick with the old, failing methods, or they could completely rethink how they responded to emergencies. At the same time, new ideas from management science and military strategy were trickling into public institutions. The concept that complex problems required specialized teams was gaining ground. Within law enforcement, a new idea began to take shape: maybe not every officer should be a generalist. Maybe some situations required a special kind of unit, a team that was carefully selected, intensely trained, and centrally commanded. Los Angeles, having been at the epicenter of the crisis, became the laboratory for this new concept. The goal wasn't just to use more force, but to use it with precision and control. The idea was to prevent chaos, reduce unnecessary violence, and bring structure to a crisis. This was the conceptual groundwork for what would soon be known as SWAT. This move toward specialization was a huge philosophical shift. It challenged the old idea that all cops were interchangeable. But it was controversial right from the start. Critics worried about creating elite, militarized police units. Civil rights groups feared a lack of accountability. But in the volatile late 1960s, the need for reform was overwhelming. The failures of the old system were on full display for the whole country to see. It was within the Los Angeles Police Department that the idea truly took root. A young lieutenant named Daryl Gates, who would later become the famous and controversial chief of police, was a key advocate. He and others saw the chaos of Watts firsthand and knew something had to change. They envisioned a unit of experienced, cool-headed officers who would train together constantly, mastering tactics that relied on teamwork and planning. This unit wouldn't be for routine patrol. It would be a special tool, activated only for the most dangerous situations: barricaded suspects, hostage rescues, and active snipers. They called it Special Weapons and Tactics, or SWAT. The name itself was deliberate. Special meant they were for exceptional circumstances. Tactics emphasized that this was about strategy and coordination, not just overwhelming firepower. What started as a desperate response to crisis would go on to fundamentally reshape policing across America, changing not just how police operated, but the very culture of law enforcement itself. How do you train for the unpredictable? In the late 1960s, a new kind of police unit in Los Angeles had to answer that very question. Their answer would change law enforcement forever. This wasn't your standard police academy training. The new Special Weapons and Tactics Unit, or SWAT, ditched the old playbook. Instead, they immersed themselves in intense, scenario-based exercises. The goal? To forge a team that could think, coordinate, and act as one under extreme pressure. LAPD training archives give us a fascinating glimpse into this revolutionary approach. They ran drills simulating barricaded suspects, practiced controlled use of force, and perfected the art of breaching and entering a hostile location. While firearms proficiency was still crucial, the real emphasis was on situational awareness, team cohesion, and crystal-clear communication. This was a radical departure from traditional military training. The core philosophy wasn't about aggression or escalation. It was about achieving control through meticulous preparation and resolving dangerous situations with minimal harm. This principle of restraint is often forgotten in modern debates, but it was the very foundation of the original SWAT concept. The first real-world tests for the LAPD SWAT unit came in the late 1960s. These early deployments were few, but they were incredibly instructive. The unit's small, tight-knit structure allowed for swift, coordinated action, a capability that was sorely missing during the chaos of events like the Watts riots. What did they learn? Internal reports from the LAPD highlighted a few key takeaways. First, having a centralized command structure drastically cut down on confusion and operational errors. When everyone knows who's in charge and what the plan is, things go much smoother. Second, the strong team cohesion they had built through training paid off big time under stress, leading to faster, more effective responses. And third, their specialized tactics proved they could contain high-risk situations without causing a lot of collateral damage. This meant that regular patrol officers could stay focused on their everyday duties, maintaining order across the city without being pulled away to deal with a crisis they weren't equipped for. This hard, empirical evidence cemented SWAT's place within the LAPD, creating a successful model that police departments across the nation would soon race to copy. The success in Los Angeles didn't go unnoticed. Soon, the idea of a specialized tactical unit started spreading like wildfire. By the early 1970s, major cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia were all experimenting with their own SWAT-style teams. Each department tweaked the model to fit their unique local challenges. For instance, Los Angeles, dealing with rapid growth and civil unrest, focused on highly structured training. New York, with its dense population and organized crime problems, opted for smaller, more flexible units. Chicago, facing industrial unrest and gang activity, created hybrid teams that emphasized both negotiation and tactical entry. Despite these local variations, the core principles remained the same: rigorous training, unbreakable team cohesion, and centralized command. Looking at the numbers from that time, it's clear these units were not being used for routine police work. In Los Angeles, between 1967 and 1972, SWAT was activated about 30 times a year. These were exclusively high-risk incidents, barricaded suspects, hostage situations, or intense armed confrontations. Deployment rates in other cities were even lower, which tells us two things. 1. These units were still in their infancy, and 2. Their use was carefully considered and dictated by local needs and political priorities. They were a special tool for special circumstances. While the first SWAT programs were born from local needs, it was the federal government that really hit the accelerator on their expansion. Programs like the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, or LEA, began offering grants to police departments. This money was a game changer. Suddenly, departments could afford specialized training, equipment, armored vehicles, advanced communication systems, everything they needed to establish a professional tactical unit that would have otherwise been financially impossible. But this influx of federal cash created a new kind of tension. On one hand, it was a huge opportunity. Departments could build fully equipped, highly trained teams from the ground up. On the other hand, critics began to worry. They argued that this easy money might incentivize departments to expand these units beyond their original, narrow mission. Was the funding creating a solution in search of a problem, potentially leading to overuse and militarization? It was a valid concern. Data from the LEA grant reports shows a clear trend. By the late 1970s, hundreds of police departments across the country had received federal funds for their tactical units. This led to a massive increase in the number of SWAT-like teams, though their size, mission, and capabilities varied dramatically from place to place. The era of the SWAT team had truly begun. From its very first days, SWAT was a magnet for media attention. Local newspapers and TV stations loved covering their deployments. The stories were dramatic and compelling, portraying SWAT as an elite force of highly trained operators, ready to confront dangers that were far beyond the scope of ordinary policing. Headlines emphasized their coordination, their advanced gear, and their calm professionalism in the face of chaos. This media coverage had a powerful effect. It shaped public perception, framing SWAT as a necessary and reassuring symbol of a police department's capability. This, in turn, motivated departments to maintain these visible, high-readiness units not just for their operational value, but for the public reassurance they provided. But not everyone was sold. Even in these early days, civil liberties groups like the NAACP and the CLU started asking tough questions. They raised concerns about accountability. Could these highly specialized, quasi-military units blur the line between civilian policing and military intervention? It was a debate that was just beginning to bubble under the surface. While these critiques weren't yet mainstream, they laid the crucial groundwork for the intense arguments over police militarization that would erupt in the 1980s and continue to this day. The story of SWAT was becoming a story of competing narratives, one of safety and control, and another of power and accountability. The creation of SWAT wasn't just a new tactic, it was a fundamental philosophical shift in American law enforcement. For decades, the prevailing wisdom was that any police officer should be able to handle any situation. It was a generalist approach. The SWAT model completely upended that idea. It was a bold admission that certain, exceptional challenges required exceptional specialization. It acknowledged the limits of a one-size-fits-all approach and instead embraced deep preparation, intricate coordination, and strategic, high-level decision-making. This shift had profound consequences. First, it led to greater operational efficiency. Teams that trained relentlessly for specific, high-stakes scenarios could achieve successful outcomes that general patrol units simply couldn't. Second, it was a revolution in risk management. By using a centralized command and structured tactics, the chances of making a catastrophic error under extreme stress were significantly reduced. And third, it changed the organizational culture of police departments. These specialized units became centers of excellence and expertise, and their high standards and disciplined approach began to influence the broader police culture. By the early 1970s, this new philosophy had taken firm root. The LAPD SWAT team was seen as the gold standard, the benchmark of excellence that other cities eagerly tried to replicate, adapting the lessons learned in Los Angeles to their own local needs. When you compare how different cities first deployed their SWAT teams, you see a fascinating picture of urban America in the early 70s. Los Angeles, which formed its unit in 1967 with about a dozen officers, focused on barricaded suspects and hostage situations, running 25 to 35 missions a year. New York City formed its team in 1971. It was smaller, just 6 to 8 officers. And they focused on organized crime and armed standoffs, with only 10 to 15 deployments annually. Chicago and Philadelphia followed suit, tailoring their units to deal with gang violence and high-risk warrants. These differences tell a story about each city's unique challenges: its population density, its specific types of crime, and its history of civil unrest. But despite these local flavors, the core ingredients were always the same: highly selective recruitment, intense specialized training, and unwavering coordination. Even within the LAPD, the birthplace of SWAT, the new unit wasn't met with universal applause. There were plenty of internal debates and criticisms. Some senior officers worried about the department becoming over-reliant on a small, elite unit. Others feared that sending in a heavily armed team could actually escalate a crisis, turning a tense situation into a violent one. And there was the constant concern about public perception, the fear that the community would see them as an occupying army, not as protectors. Supporters pushed back, arguing that the unit's discipline, training, and strict command structure were the very things that would prevent those problems. Internal reports from the time consistently emphasized that SWAT's purpose was calm, measured resolution, not intimidation. This tension between the need for operational effectiveness and the responsibility of public accountability was baked into the SWAT concept from day one. It became a recurring theme throughout the unit's history, a constant dialectic that continues to shape debates over SWAT deployment, policies, and oversight to this very day. So, did it actually work? The early statistical evidence suggests that, within its intended mission, SWAT was remarkably effective. Archival data from the LAPD between 1967 and 1972 is particularly revealing. During that period, the unit was involved in about 150 documented incidents. In a staggering 70% of those cases, the situation was resolved with 0 fatalities. Property damage was also significantly lower when compared to conventional police responses to similar riots or standoffs. The numbers also show a dramatic increase in efficiency. Before SWAT, the average response time for a barricaded suspect call was about 45 minutes. After SWAT was activated, that time dropped to just 20 minutes. And perhaps most tellingly, civil complaints related to these tactical incidents remained very low, suggesting that these controlled, planned operations were far more predictable and less prone to error than chaotic. Ad hoc responses. This early data paints a clear picture. SWAT was effective, not as a tool for everyday policing, but as a specialized solution for extraordinary problems. By the mid-1970s, SWAT had transformed from a bold experiment in a single city into a formalized, replicable model for crisis response across America. The initial success of the LAPD provided the blueprint. The fawning media attention built public support, and the flood of federal grant money provided the fuel for its nationwide expansion. Yet, even in this golden age of its creation, the seeds of future controversy were already being sown. Debates over its proper use, its proportionality, and its public perception were just beginning. The creation of SWAT marked a foundational moment in American policing, a recognition that exceptional circumstances demand exceptional preparation. This guiding principle would define the evolution of tactical police units for decades to come, for better and for worse. In our last segment, we saw how the LAPD created a specialized unit to handle crises that were simply too dangerous for regular patrol officers. The idea was brilliant, and it worked. So well, in fact, that by the late 1970s, police departments all across America wanted their own. Today we're exploring the explosive growth of SWAT from 1980 to 1999, a period where it went from a niche concept to a standard feature of American policing, and how federal money and media attention fueled a debate that continues to this day. So, how did hundreds of police departments, from massive cities to smaller towns, suddenly afford to create these elite, expensive units? The short answer is, the federal government stepped in. An agency called the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration, or LEA, became a major source of funding. It was originally created as part of President Johnson's war on crime. Through the LEA, departments got grants to cover everything: salaries, specialized training, and all that cool, high-tech gear. This funding was a game changer. Suddenly, a mid-sized city police force could acquire armored personnel carriers, advanced communication systems, heavy body armor, and specialized firearms. Things that were once financially out of reach became standard issue for these new tactical teams. But this influx of cash came with a catch. Some critics like the ACLU began to argue that departments felt pressured to use their SWAT teams more often, even for less critical situations, just to prove they were getting a return on the government's investment and to keep the grants coming. This, they claimed, started a slippery slope toward what many now call the militarization of policing. While big cities like Los Angeles and New York had the resources to build large, full-time SWAT units, the trend also caught on in smaller, mid-sized cities. Places like Albuquerque, Tulsa, and Raleigh developed their own teams. But these units were different. They were typically smaller, maybe with just 5 to 8 officers, and they were deployed far less frequently. Their primary job was serving high-risk warrants and dealing with the occasional barricaded suspect. It made sense. The scale of crime and the frequency of major incidents just weren't the same as in a place like LA. If you look at the data from that time, you see a clear pattern. In the late 80s, LAPD's SWAT team had around 20 to 25 members and was deployed 50 to 70 times a year, mostly for barricaded suspects and hostage situations. New York's unit was a bit smaller, focused on organized crime, and saw about 30 to 40 deployments a year. But then you look at Albuquerque. Their team, formed in 1983, had only 6 to 8 officers and was used just 5 to 10 times a year. This shows that SWAT wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution. Each city adapted the concept based on its own unique challenges, resources, and political climate. In big cities, SWAT was becoming a go-to tool for high-risk enforcement. In smaller ones, it remained a last resort. Then came the media. The 80s and 90s were filled with high-profile events that brought SWAT teams into the living rooms of millions of Americans. Incidents like the tragic 1984 San Isidro McDonald's shooting and the infamous 1997 North Hollywood shootout were broadcast across the nation. News coverage was dramatic, focusing on the heavily armored officers, their powerful weapons, and the rapid, decisive way they ended these violent confrontations. This media frenzy created a powerful public image of SWAT. They were seen as the elite, ultra-competent heroes who swooped in to save the day. On one hand, this boosted public confidence in the police. People felt safer knowing their city had a team like this ready to go. But on the other hand, it also sparked a debate. Critics worried that seeing military-style tactics used in community settings could normalize it, blurring the line between policing and warfare. This created a complicated mix of fascination, confidence, fear, and mistrust, depending on who you asked. By the mid-1990s, this wasn't just a fringe concern anymore. Scholars, civil rights groups, and journalists were all raising serious questions about the militarization of American policing. They pointed to a few key trends. First, the sheer frequency of SWAT deployments was skyrocketing. What was once a rare event, used only for the most extreme crises, was becoming almost routine. By the 90s, some units were being deployed dozens of times a year, often just to serve drug raids or search warrants. Second was the gear itself. Thanks to federal money and programs like the 1033 program, which gives police military surplus equipment, departments were acquiring things like armored vehicles, semi-automatic rifles, and even grenade launchers, albeit for non-lethal rounds. Third, there was a cultural shift within police forces. Tactical units were seen as the elite, the best of the best. This created a prestigious, but often isolated, culture that could sometimes lead to friction with regular patrol officers and the communities they served. Research from organizations like the Justice Policy Institute started documenting cases where SWAT raids led to civilian injuries, property damage, and intense confrontations over what turned out to be minor offenses. These stories fueled public concern that SWAT was straying far from its original purpose of handling only the most dire emergencies. The numbers really tell the story of this explosive growth. In 1970, there were maybe 20 SWAT teams in the entire country. By 1980, that number had jumped to around 200. And by 1990, there were over 600. The frequency of deployments also shot up. In the 70s, a team might be activated just a handful of times per year. By the 90s, the national average was 20 to 30 activations annually. And their mission was changing. What started as a tool for hostage situations and sniper standoffs was now commonly used for drug raids and managing civil disturbances. On the plus side, internal reports did show that using SWAT for high-risk incidents reduced officer injuries and deaths compared to sending in regular patrol units. This rapid expansion didn't go unnoticed by policymakers. Courts started to weigh in, examining whether certain SWAT deployments violated civil rights or constituted excessive force. In 1993, a major national study on SWAT concluded that while these teams were effective in extreme scenarios, they shouldn't be used for routine, low-level enforcement. The study recommended better documentation, civilian oversight, and a focus on proportionality, making sure the tactical response fits the actual threat. In response, some cities began writing stricter rules, limiting SWAT deployments to clear-cut cases like active shooters or armed, barricaded suspects. Public perception was deeply divided. In communities where a SWAT team successfully and cleanly resolved a dangerous crisis, people were grateful. They felt safer. But in other areas, particularly in communities of color and low-income neighborhoods, the reaction was very different. The sight of armored vehicles and heavily armed officers rolling down the street for a drug warrant wasn't reassuring. It was intimidating. It bred mistrust and anxiety. Studies in the 90s found that complaints related to SWAT raids were disproportionately coming from these communities, highlighting a growing divide in how police tactics were being experienced. You could even see a difference between how urban and suburban areas used their teams. A major city might have a team of 20 officers deployed 50 times a year for everything from hostage rescue to organized crime raids. A mid-sized city's team would be smaller, used maybe 10 times a year, mostly for warrants. And a suburban department might have a tiny, part-time team of 3 to 6 officers that was only called out once or twice a year for a rare standoff. This shows that while the idea of SWAT spread everywhere, its actual application was shaped by local realities. So, by the turn of the century, SWAT had undergone a massive transformation. It grew from a single experimental unit in LA into a standard, almost expected, part of American law enforcement. This expansion was driven by a perfect storm of federal funding, public demand for security, and intense media coverage. But this growth came at a cost. It ignited a fierce debate about militarization, excessive force, and the changing role of police in our society. These conversations set the stage for the reforms, legal battles, and community dialogues that would shape policing in the 21st century. Thanks for watching this part of our series. The story of SWAT is far from over, and the issues raised during this period of expansion are more relevant than ever today. How did a specialized police unit, created for rare, extreme situations, become a staple of primetime TV and a symbol of modern law enforcement? In the late 1980s and through the 90s, SWAT teams exploded into the public consciousness, moving from the fringes of policing to the very center of our cultural landscape. This transformation wasn't just about tactics and gear, it was a story written by television cameras, newspaper headlines, and Hollywood scripts. Let's explore how the media shaped our perception of SWAT, turning tactical officers into modern-day heroes, and what that meant for policing in America. In the late 80s, if you turned on the local news, you were likely to see dramatic, live footage of armored officers and tactical vehicles. News reports were filled with phrases like elite police strike force and highly trained tactical team. The media narrative was clear: these weren't just regular cops, they were specialists, a precise and powerful response to the growing chaos of modern city life. National magazines like Time and Newsweek ran in-depth profiles, giving the public a behind-the-scenes look at the intense training and advanced equipment of these units. A 1988 New York Times piece captured the sentiment perfectly, calling SWAT a new era in urban policing, where speed, precision, and preparation can prevent catastrophe. This coverage built a powerful image of professionalism and control. At the same time, Hollywood fell in love with SWAT. Police dramas and blockbuster action films began featuring tactical units and thrilling, high-stakes standoffs. Movies like Speed and shows like Cops brought the action right into our living rooms. While obviously fictionalized, these portrayals cemented the idea of SWAT as an unstoppable force, decisive, high-tech, and always getting the job done. This combination of news coverage and entertainment created a potent cultural symbol. SWAT wasn't just a police strategy anymore. It was a brand, representing the pinnacle of law enforcement capability. This public perception gave police departments a kind of social license, making it easier to justify the expansion of these units and their use in a wider range of situations. Then, two seismic events in the late 90s shook the nation and forever changed the conversation around tactical policing. The first was the North Hollywood shootout in 1997. Two heavily armored bank robbers armed with automatic rifles turned a quiet street into a war zone, completely outgunning the first responding LAPD officers. Live television broadcast the terrifying gun battle to a stunned nation. The incident was a brutal wake-up call. It starkly revealed that patrol officers were dangerously ill-equipped to handle this level of extreme violence. When SWAT units finally arrived and neutralized the threat, their role was solidified in the public eye. They were seen as the necessary countermeasure to a new, more dangerous breed of criminal. The media coverage was relentless, reinforcing the image of SWAT as the thin blue line pushed to its absolute limit, heroically holding back an overwhelming force. For many, North Hollywood wasn't a question of police overreach, it was proof that an even stronger, more militarized police response was essential for public safety. Just 2 years later, in 1999, the tragedy at Columbine High School sent a different, more chilling shockwave across the country. The attack, which left 13 dead and 24 injured, sparked a painful national debate about school safety and police response protocols. SWAT teams were among the first on the scene, but the event exposed critical gaps in their preparedness for active shooter events, especially within a sprawling school environment. Initial responses were criticized for being too slow, highlighting coordination problems and the fact that tactics designed for a barricaded suspect in a single building didn't work for killers active. Lie moving through a large campus. The lessons learned from Columbine were harsh but vital. The aftermath led to a nationwide overhaul of SWAT training. New protocols were developed specifically for active shooter scenarios, emphasizing rapid intervention to stop the threat as quickly as possible. Interagency coordination and scenario-based drills became standard practice. Columbine tragically demonstrated that while SWAT was a powerful tool, it needed to evolve to face the unforeseen horrors of the modern world. As SWAT teams became more prominent, they also became better equipped, thanks in part to federal initiatives like the 1033 program. This program, which started ramping up in the 90s, allowed local police departments to acquire surplus military equipment. Suddenly, small-town police forces could have armored vehicles, military-grade rifles, and night vision goggles. When news reports showed local SWAT teams deploying with this kind of hardware, public reaction was split. On one hand, many people felt safer, believing their police were better prepared for the worst-case scenarios they saw on TV, as a 1998 Los Angeles Times article noted. Communities were often dazzled by the efficiency of SWAT units, but on the other hand, a growing number of voices began to raise alarms. Civil liberties organizations and community activists started asking important questions. Was this level of militarization really necessary? They pointed to a sharp increase in SWAT deployments for things like serving routine drug warrants, often in minority neighborhoods. Residents in these areas reported feeling intimidated and scared, not protected. The image of a military-style raid for a low-level offense created a starkly different picture from the heroic standoff seen in movies. This created a deep cultural divide. SWAT was simultaneously a symbol of security and a symbol of excessive force. A celebrated solution to extreme crime and a source of fear and distrust within the very communities police were sworn to protect. This rising use of SWAT didn't go unnoticed. By the early 2000s, academics and policy analysts began to systematically study the trend. What they found was startling. The number of SWAT activations had skyrocketed since the 1970s. Teams that were once deployed a handful of times a year for life-or-death emergencies were now being called out dozens, sometimes hundreds, of times for a much wider range of incidents. The data showed a phenomenon often called mission creep, the original narrow purpose of SWAT to handle rare, high-risk events like hostage situations or active snipers had expanded dramatically. Studies from organizations like the ACLU confirmed what community groups had been saying. These heavily armed tactical raids were disproportionately happening in minority and low-income neighborhoods. Often for nonviolent drug offenses, this raised serious concerns about equity, community trust, and the constitutional principle of proportional response. The research painted a complex picture. While SWAT units could reduce officer casualties in certain situations, their increased use also led to more property damage, a higher risk of civilian harm, and a breakdown of police-community relations. The debate was no longer just about whether SWAT was effective, but whether it was being used appropriately and justly. So, by the end of the 1990s, SWAT was no longer just a tactical unit. It was a cultural phenomenon. It was central to how police departments planned for crises. It was deeply embedded in our collective consciousness, thanks to decades of news coverage and Hollywood action scenes. And it was at the very heart of a fierce debate about militarization, civil liberties, and the future of American policing. Incidents like the North Hollywood shootout and Columbine showcased both the incredible potential and the critical limitations of these elite teams. The media created a powerful, dual narrative, one of heroism and necessity, and another of overreach and intimidation. This complex legacy of the 90s set the stage for the intense discussions about policing that we are still having today. The story of SWAT is the story of how our fears, our media, and our policies converge to reshape law enforcement in ways we are still working to understand. By the early 2000s, SWAT teams were no longer a niche concept found only in the biggest cities. They had become a familiar feature of American law enforcement, popping up in large urban centers, medium-sized towns, and even some rural counties. But what fueled this rapid expansion? It was a perfect storm of factors, powerful media portrayals, new federal programs making military gear accessible, and a growing public anxiety about safety. This combination didn't just put SWAT teams on the map, it cemented their place in modern policing. So, how did SWAT become a household name? A big part of the answer lies in what we were all watching: television shows, blockbuster movies, and gripping news documentaries constantly put SWAT teams in the spotlight. They were portrayed as the ultimate professionals, highly skilled, incredibly organized, and always prepared for the worst. These images weren't just entertainment, they shaped public perception, building a consensus that these specialized units were an essential tool for any modern police force. The message was clear: when things get serious, you need the best of the best. While Hollywood was showcasing SWAT's capabilities, something else was happening behind the scenes. The federal government's 1033 program opened the floodgates for police departments to get their hands on surplus military equipment. Suddenly, armored vehicles, tactical vests, night vision goggles, and heavy-duty protective gear were no longer just for soldiers. This influx of hardware dramatically boosted the readiness and capabilities of SWAT units across the country, equipping them to handle threats that were previously unimaginable for local law enforcement. At the same time, the national mood was shifting. Public concern over mass shootings and terrorism was on the rise, creating a powerful demand for a more robust police response. Tragic events like the Columbine High School shooting in 1999 and the September 11th attacks in 2001 served as grim wake-up calls. Police departments felt immense pressure to prepare for the unthinkable: active shooter scenarios, complex terrorist incidents, and high-risk warrant searches. SWAT teams were seen as the definitive answer to these new and terrifying threats. This blend of media glamorization, federal support, and public fear led to a steady and undeniable expansion of SWAT. More and more departments established their own tactical teams, and their job descriptions started to grow. They weren't just for hostage situations anymore. Their role expanded to include a mix of high-risk interventions and, in some cases, simply providing a visible sense of security and reassurance to anxious communities. SWAT was becoming a multi-purpose tool in the law enforcement toolbox. Let's look closer at the 1033 program. It was a game changer. It allowed thousands of law enforcement agencies, big and small, to acquire equipment that was once exclusive to the military. By 2010, over 8,000 departments had benefited from this program, receiving everything from surplus vehicles to firearms and tactical gear. This didn't just enhance SWAT's operational muscle, it also made them far more visible. The sight of an armored vehicle on a suburban street became more common, signaling a major shift in policing. As this powerful tactical equipment became more widespread, a new trend emerged. SWAT units, originally designed for rare, high-stakes crises, were sometimes deployed for more routine police work, like serving drug raid warrants or standard search warrants. This drift in their mission, often called mission creep, started to raise eyebrows. It sparked a national conversation about balance and proportionality. Were these highly militarized teams being used appropriately? This debate about when and how to deploy SWAT continues to this day. Several high-profile incidents profoundly shaped SWAT policies and training. The North Hollywood shootout in 1997, where two heavily armed bank robbers outgunned police, was a brutal lesson. It highlighted the desperate need for better coordination, heavier firepower, and meticulous planning for confrontations with well-armed criminals. The Columbine tragedy also sent shockwaves through law enforcement, leading to the development of nationwide active shooter protocols that emphasized rapid response to save lives and ensure school safe. Other events reinforced this evolution. The Virginia Tech shooting in 2007 further underscored SWAT's dual responsibility, not only to execute a swift tactical response to neutralize a threat but also to provide reassurance and restore order in a traumatized community. Through these painful experiences, departments learned that preparation, clear communication, and seamless teamwork between different agencies were absolutely essential for protecting both their office and the public they serve. Every incident became a critical learning opportunity. The legal System also started paying closer attention. Courts began to scrutinize SWAT deployments, particularly in cases involving no-knock warrants, property damage, and the use of force. This legal oversight pushed departments to develop clearer, more robust guidelines and accountability measures. Internal review processes became more common, ensuring that every operation was justified, necessary, and conducted appropriately. The goal was to maintain tactical effectiveness while upholding constitutional rights and public trust. Ever wonder what it takes to be on a SWAT team in the 21st century? It's a world that has dramatically changed over the last decade. From 2010 to today, the landscape of urban threats has shifted, forcing these elite units to evolve faster than ever before. We're talking about a massive rise in complex emergencies, mass casualty events, and the chilling reality of active shooter incidents. Once, SWAT was primarily called for barricaded suspects or hostage standoffs. Today, their mission is far broader. They're the first line of rapid response in our schools, workplaces, shopping malls, and even our transportation systems. Their job has expanded from just tactical policing to managing large-scale public safety and coordinating a web of different agencies. Let's look at the numbers, because they tell a stark story. FBI data on active shooter incidents shows a clear and troubling upward trend. Between 2000 and 2010, the U.S. saw about 31 of these tragic events each year. From 2011 to 2020, that number jumped to 43 per year. And the latest data suggests it's now closer to 50 incidents annually. This isn't just a statistic, it's a reflection of why tactical units have become so central to modern law enforcement. Tragic events have been powerful, if brutal, teachers. The Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012 was a watershed moment. It hammered home the critical need for pre-planned entry strategies, for embedding medical support directly into tactical plans, and for advanced communication systems that could link multiple responding units seamlessly. The old way of waiting and containing was no longer enough. Then came the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando in 2016. This was a prolonged, complex siege inside a large, confusing venue. SWAT teams had to execute a multi-hour intervention that tested their ability to coordinate with other agencies, assess a dynamic situation in real time, and manage public safety while the world's media watched. And in 2018, the shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, once again reshaped tactical response policies. The focus shifted even more intensely toward rapid, immediate engagement. This led to a surge in interagency drills and highly realistic simulation-based training, all designed to shave precious seconds off response times and save lives. So what does modern SWAT training actually look like? It's a multidisciplinary masterclass in urban survival. Officers drill endlessly on urban and structural tactics, practicing how to clear multi-level buildings, sprawling school campuses, and dense office complexes. Rapid response drills are relentless, designed to make immediate action second nature, but it's not all about kicking down doors. A huge part of the evolution is medical integration. We now see embedded medics and trained officer first responders who are part of the tactical team, ready to provide life-saving care in the hot zone. At the same time, negotiation and de-escalation strategies are still vital skills, often used in conjunction with tactical maneuvers to resolve situations peacefully whenever possible. And, of course, there's the technology: drones, robotics, live-feed surveillance, and encrypted communication systems are no longer sci-fi, they are standard issue. Training scenarios are incredibly realistic, using role players, simulated environments, and massive, coordinated exercises with other agencies to prepare officers for almost any imaginable crisis. Technology has truly transformed how SWAT operates. Armored personnel vehicles, or APCs, allow teams to approach dangerous situations and make entry with a much higher degree of safety. Drones provide an eye in the sky, offering critical surveillance and reconnaissance without putting an officer in harm's way. Robots can be sent in to assess hazardous areas or even dispose of bombs. Body cameras are now widespread, providing accountability and an accurate record of events. Encrypted communication systems ensure that teams can coordinate securely without their plans being intercepted. And equipment like night vision and thermal imaging, once the domain of special military units, are now standard for major urban SWAT teams. It is this powerful combination of specialized training and advanced technology that allows these teams to effectively respond to the most high-risk, high-casualty situations imaginable. But this expansion of capabilities hasn't gone unnoticed. It sparked important conversations about oversight, proportionality, and community trust. Federal audits have examined how and when tactical units are deployed. Several states have put new policies in place, requiring special authorization for high-risk deployments, especially in sensitive locations like schools or residential neighborhoods, to build transparency. Many cities have established citizen review boards to oversee police tactical operations. Civil rights concerns and legal challenges have underscored the need to use these powerful resources proportionally and with full accountability. The public's voice is louder than ever, thanks in large part to social media. Live-stream deployments can provide immediate feedback and transparency, while viral videos can shape our perceptions of these units, creating images of heroism, skill, or sometimes, controversy. Even pop culture plays a role. TV shows and movies, like the SWAT series, blend realistic tactics with dramatic storytelling, reinforcing a mix of admiration for their abilities and caution about military-style policing in our communities. This evolution isn't just happening in the U.S. American SWAT units regularly train and exchange knowledge with elite tactical teams from countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, Australia, and Israel. These collaborations reveal different approaches to everything from counterterrorism to organized crime. The American model stands out for its frequent deployments, complex interagency coordination, and extensive use of advanced equipment, which reflects our unique domestic security challenges and federal support structures. So where do things stand today? There are about 3,500 SWAT teams operating across the United States. On average, a single team might be deployed anywhere from 30 to 80 times a year. Roughly 40% of these operations are for serving high-risk warrants. Active shooter or terrorism incidents make up about 20%, with barricaded suspects and other situations rounding out the rest. Despite the high-stakes nature of their work, officer injuries on these teams remain lower than in conventional patrol units. And importantly, feedback from the public has directly led to better policies and more transparency. The lessons from the last 15 years are clear. Tactical readiness is absolutely essential in our complex world. But there's a delicate balance. Over-militarization can erode the public's trust, which is the bedrock of effective policing. The future of SWAT lies in maintaining that balance. Engagement with the community, transparency in operations, and a proportional response are key to legitimacy. Coordination between agencies ensures a faster, more effective response. Technology like drones and robotics enhances capability but must be managed responsibly. And at the heart of it all remains the core doctrine: realistic scenario training, active shooter drills, and medical integration. This is how modern SWAT teams prepare to face the evolving challenges of our time, ready to stand in the gap when the worst happens. The 2020s have thrown unprecedented challenges at America's elite tactical units. From global pandemics to widespread civil unrest and a revolution in technology, SWAT teams have had to evolve faster than ever before. So, how have these highly trained officers adapted to a world that looks completely different than it did just a few years ago? And what does the future hold for tactical policing? Let's take a deep dive into the modern SWAT team. When the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe, it didn't just change our daily lives, it transformed law enforcement operations. For SWAT teams, this meant a complete overhaul of health and safety protocols. Officers began wearing personal protective equipment not just for tactical reasons, but to guard against an invisible enemy. Social distancing was enforced within teams, a difficult task for units that rely on close coordination. Equipment, from firearms to vehicles, underwent regular, rigorous sanitization. Interestingly, while lockdowns led to a decrease in some routine deployments like serving high-risk warrants, new missions emerged. SWAT units were called upon to support emergency health measures, providing security at mass vaccination sites and responding to tense situations in overwhelmed hospitals. Training also had to adapt on the fly. To maintain readiness while adhering to health guidelines, departments turned to virtual reality simulations and broke down large-scale exercises into smaller, socially distanced groups. The pandemic also took a heavy psychological toll on officers, leading many departments to place a greater emphasis on mental health support and resilience programs to help their teams cope with the heightened stress. Just as teams were adapting to the pandemic, another crisis erupted. The tragic death of George Floyd in 2020 sparked massive civil demonstrations across the nation, putting SWAT units at the forefront of managing large-scale crowd events. In cities like Minneapolis, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, tactical teams were deployed to maintain order and prevent violence. The challenge was immense: how to balance a tactical response with the protection of civil liberties. Departments shifted their focus heavily towards de-escalation tactics and the use of non-lethal tools to minimize injuries. Negotiation and clear communication became more critical than ever. In this new landscape, every action was under intense scrutiny. The rise of social media and live streaming meant that SWAT operations were broadcast to the world in real time, amplifying public attention and sparking heated debates about the proportionality of their response. Post-event reviews often showed that while SWAT presence helped prevent situations from escalating further, isolated incidents highlighted the urgent need for better communication and a stronger connection with the community. These events underscored that public trust is not a given, it must be earned and maintained. Parallel to these societal shifts, a technological revolution has been reshaping tactical operations from the ground up. Today, technology is a cornerstone of how modern SWAT teams plan and execute missions. Drones have become an indispensable tool, providing real-time aerial surveillance that helps commanders map out a scene and track suspects without putting officers in harm's way. Ground-based robots are now routinely sent into hazardous areas to inspect suspicious packages, dispose of explosives, or conduct reconnaissance inside buildings, saving lives in the process. And the tech doesn't stop there. In pilot programs across several cities, artificial intelligence is being used to analyze data and predict where high-risk incidents might occur. This allows for more strategic deployment of resources. Fusion centers, which bring together data from multiple agencies, enhance coordination, while body-worn cameras provide a crucial layer of accountability. Advanced gear like thermal and night vision equipment gives officers a significant advantage in low-light conditions, improving their situational awareness and overall safety. While these tools make operations more efficient and safer, they also bring up important ethical questions about privacy and the responsible use of powerful surveillance technology. So, what does a typical year look like for a modern SWAT team? Across the United States, there are approximately 3,800 active teams. Each team, on average, conducts between 40 and 90 deployments annually. The most common call-out, making up about 35% of operations, is for serving high-risk warrants. Responding to active shooter situations or terrorism events accounts for another 25%. Barricaded suspects make up 15% of missions, and a further 15% is dedicated to civil unrest and crowd control, a number that has grown in recent years. The remaining 10% covers a variety of other specialized operations. Despite the high-stakes nature of their work, officer injuries in SWAT units remain statistically lower than in conventional patrol units, a testament to their advanced training and equipment. However, civilian complaints have seen a rise, particularly during periods of civil unrest. This has led to a wave of policy reforms and increased oversight measures aimed at rebuilding community trust. In terms of technology, adoption is widespread. Most urban teams now utilize drones, a majority employ robots for dangerous tasks, and a growing number are experimenting with AI-driven predictive tools. The events of the early 2020s have directly led to significant policy changes. Many states now mandate that high-risk deployments must receive approval from a supervisor or even a court. Transparency has become a key focus, with new laws requiring departments to publish annual reports detailing their SWAT team's activities. Training curricula have been updated to place a stronger emphasis on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and mental health awareness. Some jurisdictions have even placed restrictions on the use of certain military-grade equipment, requiring federal authorization for its acquisition. To bridge the gap with the public, many departments have launched community engagement programs, from school safety workshops to neighborhood outreach events, all designed to foster positive relationships and maintain trust. How do U.S. SWAT teams compare to their international counterparts? While countries like the UK, Germany, Australia, and Israel have world-class tactical units, they are often more specialized, focusing primarily on counterterrorism or hostage rescue. In contrast, U.S. SWAT teams tend to operate with a higher frequency of deployments, often have larger team sizes, and integrate a broader range of technology, especially in major urban areas. This makes the American model one of the most technologically advanced and operationally active in the world. In the digital age, public perception and media influence play a massive role in shaping the narrative around SWAT teams. Viral videos and live streams on social media create an immediate and often unfiltered feedback loop on tactical operations. Meanwhile, traditional media, Hollywood blockbusters, video games, and reality TV shows all contribute to the public's understanding or misunderstanding of what these units do. These portrayals can build appreciation for the incredible skill and professionalism involved, but they also fuel important discussions about ethics, accountability, and civil rights. Looking forward, the core principles of modern SWAT operations are clear. Preparedness must be balanced with proportionality. Technology must be managed carefully and ethically. Coordination with community leaders and federal partners is essential. And training must continuously evolve, incorporating advanced simulations, virtual reality, and joint exercises with other agencies to stay ahead of emerging threats. At the heart of it all, transparency and accountability are the bedrock for maintaining legitimacy and public trust. The future of SWAT likely involves even deeper integration of technology. We can expect to see wider use of AI-driven predictive deployment, more advanced robotics capable of complex tasks, and a closer partnership with cybersecurity operations to combat threats in both the physical and digital worlds. The one constant is change, and for America's tactical teams, the ability to adapt, evolve, and maintain the trust of the communities they serve will be the key to their success in the decades to come. Have you ever wondered what a SWAT team in 2025 actually looks like? Forget what you've seen in movies. By the mid-2020s, SWAT is no longer just an American thing. While the U.S. model is still the most advanced, specialized tactical units are now a global standard. But today's operations are defined by a few key things: deep integration with national security, mind-blowing technology like AI and robotics, and a constant, real-time focus on public accountability. So, how did we get here, and what does it mean for policing today? Let's dive into the modern era of SWAT. First, let us look at the numbers in the United States between 2020 and 2025. There are roughly 3,800 SWAT teams nationwide, and each team is deployed anywhere from 40 to 90 times a year. What are they doing? About 35% of those call-outs are for high-risk warrants. Another 25% are for the incidents that grab headlines, active shooters, and terrorism response. The rest is a mix of barricaded suspects, crowd control, and other specialized operations. Big cities like LA and New York have massive, heavily equipped units, while smaller towns have more nimble, specialized teams. The biggest game changer has been technology. Modern SWAT teams are deploying tools that sound like they're straight out of science fiction. Drones are everywhere, providing eyes in the sky for surveillance and real-time situational awareness. Robots are sent into dangerous situations to disarm bombs or check on hostages, keeping officers out of harm's way. And now, Artificial intelligence and predictive analytics are being used to anticipate where high-risk situations might occur, helping commanders allocate resources more effectively. Even cyber surveillance plays a huge role, monitoring online threats and coordinating intelligence between different agencies. The COVID-19 pandemic also forced a major evolution, with teams adapting to use full PPE, assisting with public health logistics, and even conducting training in virtual reality to maintain their skills. This high-tech reality has also come with unprecedented public scrutiny. With social media and live streaming, every action a SWAT team takes can be broadcast to the world in an instant. This intense feedback loop has pushed departments toward major reforms. Transparency is no longer optional. Many departments are now required to publish annual reports on their deployments, and community review boards are being created to give citizens a voice in overseeing these powerful units. So, how does the U.S. stack up against the rest of the world? It's fascinating when you compare them. In the UK, you have the Counter-Terrorist Specialist Firearms Officers, or CDSFOs, who focus almost exclusively on terrorism and hostage situations. Germany has the SEC, which deals with organized crime and high-risk arrests. Australia's police tactical groups are structured regionally. And Israel's legendary Yomam and Loader units are hyper-focused on counterterrorism with some of the most advanced urban tactics in the world. RLD, the big difference, American SWAT units are generally larger, deployed far more frequently, and are often more heavily armed than their international counterparts. However, global collaboration is at an all-time high, with joint exercises and shared intelligence making counterterrorism a more unified, international effort. All this public attention and debate has led to significant legal and policy changes right here at home. The goal is to strike a better balance between operational effectiveness and civil liberties. Many departments now have strict pre-authorization rules for using SWAT in non-emergency situations. There's also more oversight on the kind of equipment teams can acquire, limiting military-grade hardware and requiring departments to prove it's truly necessary. And critically, de-escalation and cultural sensitivity training are no longer afterthoughts. They're now a core part of the standard SWAT curriculum. These reforms are a direct response to past criticisms about militarization and are designed to rebuild trust. Let's go back to the tech for a moment, because AI is truly reshaping tactical decision-making. AI-driven systems are now helping to analyze crime trends to predict threats, optimize deployment strategies for officer safety, and even provide real-time risk assessments during an active shooter event. And the future is even wilder. We're talking about autonomous drones for reconnaissance, advanced robotics for handling hazardous materials, and even augmented reality headsets for training and overlaying critical information during a live operation. But this raises important questions about privacy, accountability, and whether we're becoming too reliant on automated systems. The media plays a huge role in shaping how we see all of this. On one hand, you have stories that highlight the incredible professionalism, bravery, and rapid response of SWAT teams saving lives. On the other hand, critical reports focus on incidents of excessive force, the militarization of police, and the negative impact on communities. Social media acts as an amplifier for both sides, and viral videos of SWAT operations often become central to debates over civil rights and whether the level of force used was proportional to the threat. Two real-world examples from this era really stand out. First, the nationwide protests in 2020 saw SWAT units deployed for crowd control. The emphasis was often on non-lethal weapons, but their presence alone sparked intense debate and led directly to policy revisions demanding more proportionality. Second, the tragic string of active shooter events in schools and public places between 2020 and 2025 demonstrated the absolute necessity of modern SWAT. These responses weren't just about force, they integrated medical support, negotiators, and real-time intelligence from multiple agencies, showcasing a highly coordinated, multidisciplinary approach to saving lives. So, to quickly recap the stats from 2020 to 2025, about 3,800 teams, each deploying up to 90 times a year. Technology adoption is high, with 90% of teams using drones and 75% using robotics. These numbers paint a clear picture of an expanded operational scope, a deep reliance on technology, and a massive increase in public scrutiny. SWAT teams are no longer just domestic units. They operate within a global network, sharing tactics and technology with allies to combat international threats. Looking ahead, the evolution of SWAT will continue along these same lines. AI and predictive deployment will become more sophisticated. Robotics and autonomous systems will handle more dangerous tasks. And the push for community trust, transparency, and legislative oversight will only grow stronger. The dual identity of SWAT as both an elite tactical unit and a powerful symbol of state authority will continue to be at the center of public debate. By 2025, SWAT has transformed into a highly specialized, technologically advanced force that responds to everything from active shooters and terrorism to civil unrest and public health crises. The integration of AI, drones, and robotics has enhanced their capabilities but also raised new ethical questions. In response, legislative reforms and community oversight are reshaping how these teams operate, pushing for a balance between readiness and accountability. While the U.S. model remains the most powerful and frequently deployed in the world, the core tension between its role as protector and its image of militarization continues to define its path forward. Thanks for watching. If you found this deep dive interesting, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss our next video. Stay safe out there.